Welcome to this explainer. So today, we're diving straight into a really crucial piece of the Grade 7 Modern World History curriculum. Specifically, we're looking at Unit 3, Lesson 4, the application task for the unit we call Modern Times. If you've ever wondered how teachers actually guide students through these massive, sweeping eras of human history, while at the same time teaching them how to, really think like historians using worked examples, well, you are in exactly the right place. We're going to explore not just the what of history, but those essential evidence-based reasoning tools students need to actually make sense of it all. All right, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. First up, welcome to Modern Times. 2, essential historical concepts. 3, evidence-based reasoning. 4, comparing global perspectives. And finally, number 5, applying history to today. So, jumping right into part 1, welcome to Modern Times. Here's the big question. How did conflict and connection shape the modern world? Now, this isn't just a rhetorical question to kick things off. It's the core challenge. It's the primary lens for 7th graders throughout this entire unit. Literally every single text they read, every document they analyze, every essay they write, it all ties back to this dynamic tension. Because, the modern world wasn't just built on everyone holding hands and getting along. It was really forged in the fires of both unprecedented global connection and, frankly, catastrophic global conflict. And the scope of this unit is just massive. It builds chronologically. We kick things off in the 1880s with the scramble for global empires during the era of imperialism. Then, we see how that tension just completely boils over into the devastating years of World War I, which directly sets the stage for the unparalleled destruction of World War II from 1939 to 1945. And then, from the ashes of that conflict, we jump right into the decades-long ideological struggle of the Cold War, which brings us all the way up to our contemporary world today. Moving right along to part 2, essential historical concepts. Okay, so our first major concept is imperialism, defined as a policy or practice by which a country increases its power by gaining control over other areas of the world. But in the context of grade 7 history, students aren't just memorizing flashcards, right? As a worked example, they might dig into the scramble for Africa in the late 1800s. The goal is to explain how this really intense competition for resources and global dominance ignited global tensions. It's about getting them to see imperialism as, essentially, a lit match dropped into a very, very dry forest.
And that brings us to nationalism, a sense of national consciousness exalting one nation above all others and placing primary emphasis on promotion of its culture and interests. Now, this isn't just simple, everyday patriotism. It's prioritizing domestic interests, often in a really aggressive way. And when you combine that land-grabbing expansion of imperialism with the fierce, exclusive pride of nationalism, you get a massive catalyst for the world wars. Students are challenged here to see exactly how these two abstract ideas had incredibly tangible, devastating consequences.
So the crucial takeaway here for the Unit 3 student outcomes is that students are actively working to analyze global conflict, explain imperialism and nationalism, compare perspectives, and connect past events to current global issues. They are learning the actual mechanics of doing history, but to effectively analyze that conflict or explain these massive concepts in their final transfer task, they need a very specific set of tools. They can't just guess, they absolutely have to prove their points. Which leads us perfectly into part 3. Evidence-based reasoning. Now, the Common Core state standards mandate this idea of a shared responsibility for students' literacy development. I find this fascinating because it frames reading and writing not as, extra busy work for an English class, but as the fundamental investigative lens required in social studies. Think about it. You literally cannot analyze global conflict if you can't properly read and parse the historical documents that describe it. In a lot of ways, history is literacy. So, students are basically empowered to act like detectives. They're required to cite several pieces of textual evidence to support their analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as their own inferences. So, in a worked example, if a 7th grader claims that nationalism caused World War I, they can't just say, well, because I think so. Nope. They have to pull explicit evidence from treaties or speeches or primary accounts to build a rock-solid, airtight case. Furthermore, they have to determine a theme or central idea of a text and analyze its development over the course of the text. They're applying evidence-based reasoning to track how massive ideas actually evolve. Just imagine a student reading a whole series of historical documents spanning the decades of the Cold War. They use this exact skill to track how the ideological divide between the US and the Soviet Union grows, changes, and ultimately manifests in different proxy wars. They are learning to see the true narrative arc of history through the evidence. All right, part 4,
comparing global perspectives.
To really understand global conflict, you simply cannot look at just one side of the story. Consider the difference between a first-hand historical account, like maybe a scared soldier's letter from the trenches of WW1, versus a second-hand analysis, like a modern historian's textbook overview, written, say, 80 years later. Both are incredibly valuable, but they serve completely different purposes. Analyzing differing accounts of the exact same event helps students critically evaluate conflict without just blindly taking sides. It teaches them to stop and ask, wait, who wrote this? Why did they write it? What's their underlying bias?
And this aligns perfectly with the standard requiring them to analyze how an author develops and contrasts the points of view of different characters or narrators in a text. By connecting this literacy standard directly to the outcome of comparing historical perspectives, the reading skill actually drives the historical understanding. If you can break down how two different authors view the exact same historical treaty, you have just unlocked a massive level of critical thinking. You're no longer just a passive consumer of facts, you're an active analyst. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Applying History to Today. So after studying all these empires, the World Wars, and the Cold War, Lesson 4 culminates in this big application task, and it breaks down into 3 very clear steps. Step 1, cite explicit evidence from historical texts. Step 2, determine the central idea of the conflict. And Step 3, connect these past events to current global issues. This shows exactly how the evidence-based reasoning process naturally culminates in modern-day relevance. Because let's be real, the history of the 20th century isn't just trapped in the past. It is the direct, living context for literally all of today's geopolitical headlines. Now, to prove their mastery, students have to communicate their findings using the transfer task checklist, which is heavily grounded in writing standards. They need to utilize the historian's toolkit, draw on multiple print and digital sources, avoid plagiarism while integrating that information, and finally, write informative or explanatory texts to convey complex ideas clearly. It's one thing to kind of conceptually understand a complex idea in your own head. It is an entirely higher level skill to write an explanatory text that actually makes it clear to someone else. So I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. If you apply these evidence-based literacy tools to the past, how will it completely change the way you read the global headlines of today? Because when we teach 7th graders to demand evidence, identify bias, compare perspectives, and trace the roots of conflict, we aren't just teaching them about the 1900s. We are actively equipping them with a lifelong toolkit to navigate our information-dense, highly complex contemporary world. Thinking like a historian isn't just about the past, right? It's about truly understanding our present. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.